The following is a presentation of Geekster Media.
Remember that show back then? Remember that show? Turn on the TV, time was always flying. Why did they have to end? So many shows you forgotten. Now that we've got a podcast, we can release all the shows from our hands. Yeah, will you be the most TV dudes you'll ever listen to? As long as we keep on talking sitcoms and cartoons from back in the day. Okay, we confess, we're obsessed, but we got a podcast to help you remember that show. Hey there, TV-loving citizens of Empire City, and welcome to episode 30 of Remember That Show, the podcast where we revisit the obscure or forgotten TV shows of the 80s and 90s. It's prime time watching time. I'm Adam.
And I'm Baldwin P. William Bruce West. This time around, we're once again tuning into the world of action-adventure animation. But first, we have to jump back into our own TV-obsessed childhoods in a segment we call Theme Song.
Well, Will, our show today was based on an 80s toy line, and you've often stated on the program here that you didn't become a kid until the 90s, in terms of your TV watching habits at least. So was that the case with toys too, or was there an 80s toy line with a cartoon tie-in that you collected and played with in your younger years?
That's a great question, because there were toy lines I knew of that had cartoons, but I never saw the show. Like, I think I've mentioned this before, but like, I used to carpool with my teachers. So it was one of those things of like, I had to get to school early and I had to stay late. So I missed most like kids programming when I was in elementary school, unless I had a sick day. Like, I might get home just in time to see the last 15 minutes of Turtles, but otherwise, like, I didn't watch He-Man, I didn't watch Thundercats, I didn't watch all that. So it's like I always wanted the toys from like the Sears catalog and stuff like that, but never really knew about the show tie-in. Even with G.I. Joe, like I remember Bazooka was my first 80s G.I. Joe figure, but I wasn't watching the show. I'm that weird kid who likes the Deke era more than the Sunbow era. I would have to say the first toy line tie-in kind of like property I found was the real Ghostbusters. And that was like right before the phenomenon that was Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And then there was no looking back after that. But like real Ghostbusters, I missed that like first wave of like them in their actual jumpsuits. So it was like the Fright Features was when I got in there. And it's that weird deal of like, I never collected all of one line. So my 4 Ghostbusters each come from a different line. So it's like they're at a really bad costume party because some of those like suits were really out there. But I had like Ecto-1 and the Firehouse. And since there was no like man in my life, I remember I put that together at like 9, something like that. So like real Ghostbusters for me. How about you?
Oh, yes. I was watching the cartoons, but I also was buying everything, but only a few from each line. So I'd have like 2 to 3 Masters of the Universe figures. I'd have Spikor, and I'd have like, the Battle Armor He-Man, and maybe, like if I was lucky, one other villain or something. And then like G.I. Joe, same thing. I had like 3 G.I. Joe figures. I had like 2 or 3 of the Kenner superpowers. Like that was it. But like you, real Ghostbusters, because that was like the cartoon I was committed to and the toys I was committed to. So like I was buying like the Garbage Man and like on the Tombstone Tackle and like that whole wave, the weird humans that turned into ghost monsters. They weren't really even ghosts, or they're just ghosts that look like people. I don't know what the explanation was there. So that was big for me. And I always had the weird Ecto vehicles. They had like the one that was a helicopter, and then they had the one that was kind of like yeah, and then what was it? What Ecto 3 was like this weird kind of like dune buggy thing. Like I don't even know if it was a dune buggy. It's like a folding.
Well, there's
What
the
was that?
Ecto 3000, which is like the race car, and then
Yeah.
there's the Street Sweeper and the Highway Haunter. But I do think they eventually came around to an Ecto 3. I can't remember what it was. I always hated that the Ecto 2 didn't actually fit in the Ecto 1 like it did in the cartoon. You know? But like I had all the vehicles too, so I'm right there with you.
Yeah, and then like obviously like Ninja Turtles was the next thing where you just because that line was so diverse again in the weird creatures they just created for the line, like some of them were on the cartoon but not all, and then like you had also the pizza launcher or whatever. They came up with so many fun little things you could play with. So yeah, those were definitely my major ones that I would have had the most of. But I think I've mentioned this possibly in the past as well, as I just had a network of friends whose parents bought them literally every figure in a line. So I could just go to their house and play. So it wasn't a big deal for me, in terms of like, oh, I have to have them all. It's like, well, Brent has them and Eric has them. I'm good to go.
That's the makings of a good sharer. Like I was never that, like I needed to have it. Like it's not enough to just go to their house and play with it. Cause we had one kid, Eric Janison. He was like our quote unquote rich kid where he got everything. And it was like, yeah, you could go to Eric's house, but you still hated like leaving because the toys stayed there.
Well, all the Erics I knew were the rich kids. There was something going on in the 80s with rich people spoiling their kid's name Eric. And I do have to say, too, like you say, good sharer, really it was the makings of a good moocher.
Gotcha. Well, while we're on the subject of toys, because who knows when we'll find ourselves back on this topic again, what is your most collected toy line throughout your life?
I mean, I think you and I are probably going to be on the same page here as well, because it's Marvel Comics figures by Toy Biz. From the first Marvel Superheroes line in 1990, and really, I mean, I had a couple of Secret Wars figures from the 80s as well, but just like the 90s was my boom collecting period. So like all the X-Men figures, even though I wasn't an X-Men fan per se, but that introduced me to their world. And especially though, the Spider-Man animated series line, that was the big one for me. Like I spent most of my chore money on those figures and birthdays and Christmas. That's, getting the Daily Bugle play set and whatever. Like I love that line so much. The sad part is, of all my Marvel figures I collected over the years, I gave most of them away to a charity garage sale that was raising funds for somebody's surgery or whatever. That was like the mid 2000s where I'm like, I'm growing up. I'm going to be an adult who wears button-down shirt and a tie to work every day, and I don't need these figures. But the ones I would not give up were the Toy Biz Spider-Man figures because it meant so much to me. Plus, within that, I have a sub collection, which is my black costume Spider-Man and Venom figures still on card. Like all of those from Secret Wars to like the later era of the Toy Biz figures, like that first 5 years of black costume and Venom figures. Like I have all those because I was just like, I can't believe they're making these. This is so great. But how about you, Will? Because you're still collecting heavily.
Yeah, but I think I'm gonna surprise you because mine is Power Rangers. Like, we're looking at like 30 years straight. Now, I did the Toy Biz stuff as well. The first few X-Men waves, like when they started making them for all the cartoons and even into like Marvel Legends, I wasn't there for that. Like, I bought a total of one wave of Toy Biz Marvel Legends just because I happened to find them all on the peg at the same time, and I'd never done a Build-A-Figure before. So I remember it was the MODOK Build-A-Figure. So like I bought that, but otherwise I came back to Marvel with the Hasbro license. So like for me, it's Power Rangers, like all the way back to 1993. And it's weird because I didn't think we were going to get this deep on a C.O.P.S episode, but folks are going to learn a lot about Will tonight. So Power Rangers was kind of a landmark in my household because my mother was very religious. To the point where this is always strange to me growing up because just from like a demographic standpoint, like white kids always laugh at me about this, but I feel like black kids kind of sort of understand some of it. Black people get to an age where just like religion takes over. And the fact that my mom had me at 43, she had me after that point. So there were certain things like all of our cohort grew up with Motu. My cousin got me a Motu figure that I trashed, like I bit his hands off, all sorts of stuff, because that's what I did as a kid. She still made him take it back to the store. And he's like, I can't take this back. Like, I think he just threw it away. She hated He-Man because God is the master of the universe. So then I had a subscription for years to Nintendo Power, and at some point she bribed me to get rid of them because only God has power. So now we got this franchise called Power Rangers, which, like, I was able to sell the rarity aspect of it. I could downplay the power because I grew up a collector. This is that era when McDonald's Happy Meals had 4 toys a month. It was 1 per week, and like, if you didn't find it at one place, you had to go to another one. It wasn't these like 15 toy Happy Meals. Well, it was a tradition in our family. Saturday was McDonald's Day because I had to collect these things. So I grew up a collector. So when this came out as like that first year Power Rangers where they were impossible to get, they were like the Tickle Me Elmo Cabbage Patch doll. She kind of bought into that too. So it was about the chase, honestly. I think that's really where my toy hunts came from. And I was the kid, like, no one would understand this today, but I would call Toys R Us when they opened on weekends and be like, did you get any Power Rangers? And I'm 11. If they got them, they'd hold them. That kind of deal. So it's like I started out small. That first year, I got red, black, and like an 8-inch scale Megazord. But then that next summer, when the Automorphins came out, which the commoners call the flip heads, I got all of those because I called a Toys R Us and my cousin drove us to Virginia. That was where the Toys R Us was with them. And like from there, it just snowballed. I was getting every Megazord. I was getting like all the teams until I went to college. So we're talking like 7 years of Power Rangers at that point. Tradition, like every season Megazord, every season team. When I went to college, it got harder because we didn't have TV in Ithaca. Like, it's weird. There's no like antenna signal. But I made this vow. I was like, I will keep watching this show because freshman year was rough for me, and it was kind of my like safe harbor. It was like my regression when finals would get rough or something. Let's pop in a Power Rangers tape. I made this whole like wish upon a star that I will watch this show as long as it exists. Little did I know it would keep going. And it would keep going. So I get out of college, I'm back to buying Megazords and stuff again, and team sets again. But then I started this whole project to merge it with the toy hunts. I started piecing together Megazords from thrift stores to add like another dimension to it. There's seasons I missed because it went to cable, and like I didn't have cable. So like the Disney years are kind of a mystery to me. But I mean, I'm still buying Power Rangers. Hasbro has given up on them. I bought 80% of the Lightning collection. My basement looks like a bomb went off in it, but my Power Rangers display is pretty much always impeccable. So it's Power Rangers for me.
That's amazing. And I totally am with you on calling the Toys R Us, calling around, because I did that for my Marvel figures. There were specific ones I saw on the back of the card, and I'm like, oh, I want this one. This one. My local Target doesn't have it. Let me call Toys R Us over here. Let me call this one. And of course, there's like, whatever, kid. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to walk all the way back there. But I would sit on the phone for like 15 minutes on hold until they got back to me and said to somebody, yeah, we have it. Just come over. Like, I'm sure they didn't check, they didn't care.
Well, some people just forget about how powerful the phone was for toys before the internet. I wrote a blog post at this point, probably almost a decade ago, about the Toy Biz hotline because so many people never called the Toy Biz hotline. You would call this 800 number and this automated voice would tell you what figures were coming out. But it wasn't like AI generated, but it was just like not a comic person. So he'd be like Magneto, Sabretooth, like things like that. But it's like, that's how you knew what was coming up. There was no Toy Fair. There was no like Action Figure Insider. Like, that was how you got your news.
Yeah, for sure. Well, here's the thing, Will, with your lifelong pursuit of Power Rangers, they had a Green Ranger, but we need to figure out how our show today got the green light. So in 1971, a group called Action for Children's Television, or ACT, headed up by Peggy Charon, was campaigning to bring more quality children's programming to television, which led to, quote, violent superhero cartoons being removed from the airwaves and proposed restrictions on advertising during children's shows. Now, a certain amount of hours had to be devoted to worthwhile programming that would enrich children, aka bore them with learning, you know. In 1981, the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, removed time limit restrictions related to the amount of time broadcasters could devote to advertising to children on their networks and their ability to advertise children's products during commercial breaks of cartoons for kids. So this ultimately led to toy companies basing entire animated series around their new toy lines as built-in advertising for their products, and the 80s as we know them were born. A decade that was built and steeped in our devotion to toy-based cartoons with very thin plots and even thinner characters. But to this day, the license holders continue to make money from nostalgic kids like us that just grew up in front of the TV, and this meant everything. So with all this advertising going on during what was already, as people often say, a 30-minute commercial, Will, did you have a favorite toy commercial as a kid that made you want to instantly buy the plaything that was being advertised?
Yup, G.I. Joe. Again, I said earlier, I love the Deke era more than the Sunbow era. And during the Deke era, WWF isn't in a great place at this point, and G.I. Joe's not in a great place at this point. But if you watched WWF Superstars or WWF Challenge, those were the weekend syndicated shows, not like Raw or anything like that. Hasbro was a sponsor. It was like Hasbro and Stacker 2, which was like basically bootleg creatine. Anyway, G.I. Joe at this point had moved on to live action commercials. So there was a live action Duke, and there was like this storyline that played out throughout the commercials of like Duke would get brainwashed and he became a Cobra soldier. And then it turns out like, psych, I wasn't really Cobra, I'm a Joe. And he punches Cobra Commander. And it's just this live action guy with an actual costume, which was like the Deke era Duke, which is like the tan and red camo. It's a saga, but like it builds up the different subsets because by this point for G.I. Joe, there is no basic line. At this point, the basic line is considered Battle Corps, but everything else is either like Eco Warriors, Ninja Force, there's Star Brigade, there's all these different like subsets. Street Fighter was like merged into G.I. Joe because they were the same scale. I looked forward to these commercials, and then it made me want to get those toys because he would be on like a mock-up of the new vehicle, that kind of thing. And they're really low-budget commercials. They fit well with the WWF mid-90s demographic, but like that's the first time where I was like, oh, this is awesome. How about you?
Oh, for sure. Like, I mean, yeah, the G.I. Joe commercials, I always felt were top-notch. They always did a lot with those. But for me, like what was strange was most of the toys, especially that I was collecting in the 90s, like the figures, I didn't ever see commercials for those. It was just walking into the store, seeing them on the pegs and being like, these are awesome. Or looking at the back of the card and saying, oh, I want this, I want this. But the early 90s Stretch Armstrong resurgence, where they kind of rebranded him as kind of this surfer dude, got my attention because the commercial, like for you, had a live action Stretch Armstrong stopping bad guys with these goofy computer stretching effects. So I remember like I was all in on those. I got a full-size Stretch Armstrong and his villain Vac-Man for my birthday. Then I bought the mini version of Stretch and his dog Fetch. And then Stretch like broke, you know, like the traditional thing where his syrup or whatever was in him, you know, was coming out. So I had to buy another mini Stretch Armstrong. So like I loved Stretch Armstrong. And that was one where I was just like, I'm glad it worked out. Because there was another toy that I saw a commercial for that I bought and it did not work as advertised. It was one of those like water gun headsets where it was supposed to be voice activated.
I remember that. You just go fire, fire, fire like Beavis and Butthead.
Yeah. And I have the picture of me with that and Vac-Man when I got that for my birthday. One of them was cool and the other one was not. And I was just like, had water dribbling down the side of my face every time I said fire. So it did not work out. But at least there was one that had truth in advertising, and that was Stretch Armstrong. What a hero.
Well, also, the worst part of those 90s commercials was like, they always had these elaborate like play sets that weren't available. And like, I think parents actually looked for them. Like, there'd always be like, to show the missile firing action, they knock over a barrel or knock over some crates. And then the bottom of the screen is like, play set not available. That was like the most frustrating because I just really wanted a back alley play set. No one was making that, Well, Hasbro was a major player in the toy industry who took great advantage of the lack of restrictions to produce massively popular toy lines whose sales were bolstered by cartoons like Transformers, G.I. Joe, and My Little Pony, among many others. In 1988, Hasbro decided to keep the train rolling by producing C.O.P.S and Crooks, a unique toy line that broke the mold. First of all, the figures were much larger than G.I. Joe or standard action figures like the Kenner Superpowers line, with more articulation and accessories. Each character also had a weapon that was a mini cap gun and came with a roll of caps to create the sound of gunfire. The packaging featured large and bombastic graphics by comic book artist Bart Sears, who was also responsible for designing all the characters in the line, which consisted of the good guys, aka C.O.P.S, and the bad guys, aka Crooks. The line ultimately consisted of 24 figures and 9 vehicles, which each included an exclusive driver figure. So technically, there were 32 figures in all. Adam, did you play with C.O.P.S toys as a kid?
Oh, definitely. So here's the thing. When I think back to 80s Toys R Us, I remember mostly going to the location in Provo, Utah while visiting my sister in 1988 and being totally blown away by the display that they had there of C.O.P.S and Crooks figures. I had obviously seen the cartoon by this point, but they were just like nothing else on the shelves at the time. Their size, all those accessories. Plus, the cap gun was a big selling point to me because unlike the Kenner RoboCop figures, where the cap firing feature was built into the figure itself, which was lame, if you wanted, you could just take the little cap gun for yourself. And I like to use it as like a secret spy weapon and hide it in my sleeve or and like pop it out in my hand. So to me, it was just like, I would have bought it just for mini cap guns. Like that would have been enough for me. And I only ever owned 2 figures though. I owned Long Arm, who was just a handsome blonde hero type who wore a generic dark blue cop uniform. And then a guy who, to my knowledge, never appeared in the cartoon, Taser, who had a generic light blue cop uniform, but he was a bald black dude. And the weird thing is, Buttons McBoom Boom was always my favorite villain, and I have no idea why I never bought him. And I think it's because, though, as I look back, I always equated something being cool with being more expensive. So I probably talked myself out of it, like not realizing that all the figures cost the same amount. But I'm like, he's just so awesome compared to these guys. I'll buy the generic one. That's probably more affordable, But what about for you?
I'm in that same boat. I only had 2, and I remember exactly how I got both of them because my very religious mom used to go to this nursery, this like flower nursery that was in the same shopping center as Toys R Us. That was like the only way I could get to Toys R Us sometimes. So like she's at that place and I'm like begging her, can I go to Toys R Us? So we go to Toys R Us and I didn't know what this thing was. It just looked cool. And like it's that pressure because your mom's like, come on, hurry up. And so I grabbed Sundown. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was like, because I used to really like the Galaxy Rangers and like Brave Star. So I'm like, oh, hey, it's a Texas Ranger cop guy. I don't know. I didn't know the difference between any of them. So I grabbed Sundown. And it was a removable cowboy hat, which like we were entering an era where everything was just molded on. So when I think back on like this dude had a hat I could take off like Brave Star. But then later on, we're talking like mid 90s 90s, so this is after it has re-aired as Cyber Cops on CBS. There was like this mom and pop toy store that was closing down here called Juvenile Sales. And I found the attack vehicle, which is basically like their paddy wagon. So like I got it for like $15 in like 1994 money. And like it had a driver who I don't know. I don't even remember that dude's name because they just put randos in the vehicles. And so like I still have that. I actually saw it the other night in my mom's house. I don't get rid of anything, but my entire life I never had the marquee figures like BP Vest and Long Arm. Long Arm was awesome, but no, I had Sundown and whoever drove the attack vehicle.
Sundown always cracked me up because he mentioned Brave Star, but he always reminded me Masters of the Universe had Rio Blast.
Yep.
You know, same thing. Rio Blast was like Buttons McBoom Boom and Sundown combined because he had those guns that popped out of him, you know. But anyway, it was just a great line that, again, like we said, is just, it really was so different in its moment. But we have to figure out now what made the cartoon different, if anything, from the competition in our elevator pitch. So C.O.P.S was a syndicated 1988 animated series produced by DiC, which ran for one season of 65 episodes. C.O.P.S stood for Central Organization of Police Specialists, which was a special task force in the fictional Empire City that was headed by FBI Special Agent Baldwin P. Vess, who earned the code name Bulletproof after sustaining serious injuries in a high-speed chase, and was outfitted with a cybernetic bulletproof torso that extended his life and crime-fighting ability. Now, each of the cops had a special abilities of some sort and code names, such as the previously mentioned Long Arm, who could launch out a grappling hook handcuff, Bowser and his dog Blitz, who was also injured in the line of duty and given a cybernetic canine body, Bullseye, the helicopter pilot, and computer specialist Mainframe, who had a hat. There were many more members of the team who cycled throughout the series based on the needs of the missions against the crooks. Speaking of which,
the criminal activity of Empire City all seemed to be controlled by Big Boss, who looked like the Kingpin with hair and sounded like Edward G. Robinson, but also had a metal hand for some reason. His nephew Berserko was a dim-witted street punk who often sent out to rob and steal, while Dr. Bad Vibes and his robot sidekick Buzzbomb were always creating criminally based gadgets, and Misdemeanor was the mannish female member of the team with enhanced strength. Also getting a lot of screen time were Rock Crusher, always dressed in the traditional black and white striped prisoner uniform, and Buttons McBoom Boom, a classic gangster with machine guns installed in his chest. It should be mentioned that the series was directed by Kevin Altieri, who would go on to direct Batman the Animated Series in the 90s, with character designs by Peter Chung, who would also go on to fame in the 90s for creating the trippy Aeon Flux for MTV. Speaking of the 90s, C.O.P.S did eventually get renamed Cyber Cops during a brief period of reruns in 1993, so as not to be confused with the popular reality TV show C.O.P.S. Adam, did you watch this animated series as a kid?
Oh, as much as I could. There was something about C.O.P.S that I loved the character designs. So when I found out later that it was the same guy who did Aeon Flux, I'm like, what? Like, it makes so much sense. But at the time, I had no concept of what he really wanted to be doing, the stories he really wanted to be telling. But I think what stood out was Bulletproof was such a cool leader character. Like, there was just something, you just didn't see a character like Bulletproof on TV at the time. But also, of course, I had a crush on Mainframe because she was just kind of a blonde April O'Neil. But in retrospect, she looks like an animated Marky Post, right?
Yeah. And she's good with computers, which, like, when you think about the time, a pretty girl, good with computers.
Yeah, I mean, it went against so many of the tropes of the time. And the one thing I always remember, though, and you have to tell me if you have any recollection of this, because I have not found it in any online posting, but, you know, they had this tagline, fighting crime in a future time. Bulletproof says it in the theme song, but there is an intro coming back from commercial jingle that I recall that it was fighting crime in a future time. Now back to cops. And then the show would start up again. And that has been in my brain for all these years. And I'm like, did I make that up? Because I can't find it anywhere like on a broadcast of cops, even that has commercials. So do you remember that being a thing?
I don't. And I usually remember bumpers, but I mean, they turned on the LHC and the timelines merged. So that's from the old world. That's pre-New 52.
That must be it. I know, because I'm just like, it feels like, so many shows had those things that would come in and out, like going out and going into commercial. And so that's what I'm used to seeing. But everything is like the syndicated version, and everything online is pretty much just ripped from DVDs because this show has been released over and over again. It's not lost necessarily, but it also wasn't popular enough to be celebrated. That's why it's on our show, because it is semi-obscure. It's not like a staple of the 80s animated blocks. But what about for you? Where were you watching Cops?
Definitely. I remember this like when it aired, and it's strange because this is that period of time when like I'm slowly becoming a kid. But the weird thing for me about this show is it's one of the first times I can recall a kid's show having a pilot. Now, I know it happened before, but I wasn't watching those shows. I saw like the premiere of DuckTales, stuff like that, but like I especially remember the pilot for Cops. And since syndication pretty much did whatever it wanted back in the day, I swear that in DC, that thing aired in prime time. But it's weird because it does that thing where like in the actual episode order, the pilot is episodes 8 and 9. If you start at episode 1, it is not how we set up everything. But I remember watching like an hour special, like maybe a Friday evening on WDCA 20 about this show called Cops. And it was episodes 8 and 9, which is mission number 1. And we find out who BP Vess is, and we see, and it's like we didn't have to wait till tomorrow because they just aired those 2 parts as like a 1-hour special. But I mean, outside of that, it wasn't daily for me because again, I wasn't getting home in time. That was like around here that aired probably like 2:33. I'm getting home at like 5. I got to see the pilot. It sowed the seed, and I knew the toys existed, but it's not something I look back on as like, oh, that was my favorite show. It's just more like, hey, remember that show?
Hey, perfect. What do you know?
He said the thing.
All right, well, let's find out what we remember liking about Cops as we check out our Cheers. The thing going back to it now with these adult eyes is I realized this show did not skimp out on the design work because they are not reusing any animation like Filmation, and Brave Star and Masters of the Universe and all that. Each episode had all new sets, if you will. They were totally original for the story, new character designs just for, individuals that were coming into the series in and out, gadgets and vehicles that Dr. Bad Vibes is creating for their different capers. Like Peter Chung and this design team went above and beyond. And it's crazy to look at how much they were doing for a show that was literally just meant to sell action figures compared to other programs of the time. Like I just interviewed Bart Sears on my Wizards, the podcast Guide to Comics podcast. And he was saying, he's like, we didn't do this for the cartoon. Like when it was originally being developed and they brought me on, it was just toys. And then they decided, maybe there was always that thought, but he's like, in my mind, I was just creating toys. I wasn't doing character designs for anything that was going to be animated. So maybe it was just Peter Chung saying, hey, this is my first big project that's going out nationwide. Let me, give him something to remember me by.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, where to even begin with this? Because like revisiting this show, one thing I really loved about it, and this is going to get like Will's really going down the rabbit hole on this one. Cops, as it was then, actually takes place in our present day. I made that joke about the LHC and the other timeline, but there's certain things that like you could say it predicted or maybe happened in that timeline. It happens in our present day, and I say that because there is one character on the team whose name is Checkpoint. Now, Checkpoint is actually Wayne Sneeden III. If you know who Wayne Sneeden Jr. is, that is Beachhead from G.I. Joe, because Hasbro loves to tie their things together the same way there's that future episode of Transformers that alludes to like Flint and Lady J's kid and Cobra Commander and all that stuff. So like he's on his toy file card, it tells you that his father was a member of a secret military group in the 80s and 90s. So if Wayne Sneeden III is currently in his 30s during the show, that would put him around right now. And did I mention that their president is a black lady? We're seeing, they got flying cars. We're seeing the world we missed out on. But like you said, I love the gadgetry. I feel like it's subtle in its attempts to make us want the toys, because everything they do with them is so awesome. You know, it's like bulletproof, like his clothes get shot up, but there's that like chest with the star on it. And then every time Long Arm does something, even though he's in that weird, like it's almost an old-fashioned cop uniform, but like he still shoots out this like, what was that, bionic commando?
Yeah.
Like, he's got that thing going on. It just like, it's an action-packed show. So it's like, I understand, like it's cut from the same cloth as every other thing from that era, but as you said, they really put like work into it. They're not recycling backgrounds. They're not skimping anywhere.
Yeah, and it's not formulaic. Like each episode is completely unique as a standalone story. And as a result, it's kind of always going to be surprised because you don't know where the story is going to go. Like to me, like most kids' TV shows of the era, like you watch one, you've seen them all. You know, like you really have some idea of where it's going. This is a little bit harder to predict, you know, even from like the character standpoint. Like this is an intelligent show in terms of the plots and the dialogue. Like they don't fall back on, oh, snarky jokester guy who gets annoying, but he's supposed to appeal to the kids with his surfer slang, you know? Or by the same token, there's no kid added to the team to have the Robin the Boy Wonder factor of wish fulfillment. Like the computer genius could have been like a 10-year-old kid, you know, who's really annoying, but they don't do that. Like it's basically just an animated police procedural TV show that doesn't talk down to its audience. It's pretty serious all the way across the board. It has robots and characters with some superpowers, but it stays very grounded in the storytelling to the point where it goes hard. Like you said, there are real bullets, at least in the pilot on this show. I mean, that's how they show Bulletproof lives up to his name. The crooks shoot him with machine guns at point blank range after his enhancement procedure. I mean, they're just bouncing off him. Like, I don't know how they got away with that when G.I. Joe for years had to do lasers, you know, and they're being able to actually have bullets on their show. Like, that's crazy.
All you do is you tell standards and practices. This is in the future, so these bullets haven't happened yet. You know, like that's how you get around it.
These are melting bullets. Yeah.
Right. No, I love BP vests because I have to say, in pop culture at this time, and as like the leader of a team, you have this like suave black guy. Like he's clearly like, if you made a live action Cops, it would have been Carl Weathers with the Stoney Jackson hair. They would have made him shave his mustache. But like other than that, this is Carl Weathers, and he's just so smooth. And so when I find out that like his voice actor, was it Ken Ryan or something, who's a white guy? He's doing his best Kevin Conroy voice before we knew who Kevin Conroy was. You know, like I was like, I felt betrayed. But no, like this character, like he's so awesome. And he's a good boss. Like he's not like a hard ass to him. He listens. There's the episode, well, it's the first episode chronologically, where he and Hardtop are like going undercover, and he notices that like Hardtop has a fear of heights, and he's like, you don't have to be here. This isn't official police business. He doesn't tell him he's scared of heights. It's just that like BP has this like empathy, you know, and maybe it's because he's like a Fed and he was trained that way. Because one thing that I didn't take away from it as a kid, but like researching for this episode, is kind of like G.I. Joe. every team member has a specialty. So it's like BP is the FBI agent, and then you've got Blitz and what's his name? They were the K9. And then you've got your like MP guy, and then you've got your like undercover operative in, I think it's Mirage. And it's like everybody had a specialty. Highway is the highway patrolman. It's like a law enforcement Captain Planet, you know, like by their powers and nightsticks combined, they were the elite police force. So it's interesting knowing that, like, oh, it's a fire this episode, so the guy who's really good with fires is going to take the forefront here. It's almost like Rescue Heroes. Rescue Heroes falls in that period of time where it's before we would have had kids, but it's after we were kids, but they're always in thrift stores. So there was like a period of time where I really wanted to know what that thing was about. And there's a rescue hero for everything, you know? It's like the guy who pushes the stretcher out of the ambulance. Oh, that's Stretch, you know? And then the ambulance driver, oh, that's Siren, you know? So it's just like, it's that kind of model.
What I am convinced the Mace character from C.O.P.S, there is like one of those figures, you know, of rescue heroes that looks exactly like him. Like they just took the same model with like the goggle glasses and the baseball hat thing and everything. I'm just like, wait a minute, I've seen that at you know, Goodwill many times.
Oh yeah. And I mean, the show was also an inspiration in ways it didn't realize, because Sundown's first name is Walker and he is a Texas Ranger. This is 5 years really before Walker Texas Ranger would premiere. I think someone's got a lawsuit on their hands.
Chuck Norris. But even with the bad guys, it's very strange how mostly intelligent they are. Even Berserko, who's supposed to be kind of like, he kind of talks like this. Hey, uncle, what are we going to do? Like, you think he's like the whiny idiot, but he eventually becomes deputy mayor. He's able to actually work within the system to be a crook, not just like smash and grab. Big Boss himself is pretty together. Like, he's not insane. He maybe has a few mood swings here and there, but mostly he assembles his villains, you know, and he sets them out. He knows you do this, you do that. Like, everybody is competent in their specialty. Although I have to say, when I look at Big Boss now, he reminds me of the villain, was it Limburger from Biker Mice from Mars? Like they're almost the same character design. And I'm just like, wow, again, talk about lawsuits, you know? Like,
I never saw an episode of Biker Mice from Mars. We probably have to cover that
I
show.
think so.
I was talking about that on Blue Sky the other day, where that's the tail end of the anthropomorphic badass era from Turtles. And I wasn't touching that show. Battletoads is where I stopped. But like one thing we haven't talked about though that was also awesome, the music.
Oh,
the
yeah.
music. The theme song by itself is incredible. Like it's one of the best of the era. But the music is done by a duo who pretty much did most of the Deke music during the Andy Hayward era. A couple of guys known as Shooky Levy and Haim Saban,
Oh,
who
yes.
are really just like 5 years away from their lives changing forever. But like the music is so great in the sense of like this show does really something that Power Rangers does well, and I love this in any property. It's a trope known as the theme song power up, you know, where it's like, uh-oh, that needle drop means somebody's about to get their butt kicked, you know, like we're heading into the last 10 minutes of this episode. So the music really helps sell the show.
Yeah, it's really strong. And especially just, yeah, during the opening credits, it is another case of where the animation is a little bit better for the theme song, you know, and it's sped up and it's more intense. But either way, like the show itself still looks great. And that music, yeah, just carries you through in a big way. It kind of reminds me of the Airwolf theme a little bit. Like it's got that vibe, but it immediately says hard hitting police adventure. Like you can't get away from it. You know, it's kind of like Dragnet on steroids.
I'm gonna lose so much credit from this episode. Never seen Airwolf.
What?
It's Knight Rider in the sky. Nobody needs that. But like the last cheer I have is that this is very important too for what the show was meant to do. I like that they take every opportunity to introduce characters by name. There are so many of these properties, especially G.I. Joe, where you might see someone in the background, but you don't learn their name till you see them on like the peg at Toys R Us. But here, every chance they get, roll call, or in the final credits. That way, when you go to Toys R Us with your mom, you can be like, oh, I want Long Arm and BP Vest, and I want Mainframe. They didn't make Mainframe, but you know what I mean? So it's just like they were training their audience through like repetition, and like any chance they got is like, this is who they are, this is their specialist. In that like pilot episode, you're told who they are, why they're being recruited for the team, and then you have that whole vignette of them being sent out to bring them in. You know, like that's a whole production that didn't need to be 2 episodes, but I appreciated it being 2 episodes.
Yeah, to your point of Bulletproof being a good boss, he knows everybody's name. He's going to make them feel identified and recognized, you know? So that's great. He's like, we need you for this. Go out and do it. All right. Well, there is a lot to celebrate about Cops, but there's got to be something that might put them in the slammer. So let's check out our jeers.
Boo! Boo! Boo!
I just got to say, the show doesn't have any attitude or pizzazz. That is what is missing. It's very competently made, but the characters are kind of bland. It doesn't even like make attempts at humor, really. It focuses on the action and the investigation, and that's kind of it. So even though the episodes are full of interesting ideas, it's not fun for kids to watch. As a kids show, it doesn't work. Like as an adult now, I appreciate so much more about it than I did when I was watching it. But I can't imagine my children having any interest at all. There's no youthful energy present in the show. It feels like made by 40-year-olds for 40-year-olds.
Amen. That was my thing right there. It's almost a piss or get off the pot scenario where it doesn't know what it wants to be. Like, it wants to sell toys, but it's really not catering to its audience. And you were saying it's an intelligent show in the sense that it's a police procedural, but that's not what an 8-year-old wants.
Mm-mm.
And like, they really don't do a great job. I found that most of the plots were highly convoluted. They're not simple. Now, I'm a smart person in certain ways and not in other ways. Like, I don't deal well with heists or mysteries because I don't connect dots that quickly. So that could be my whole thing there. But in the pilot, because we have to talk about this, the big plan is Dr. Bad Vibes has created this thing called the Ultimate Crime Machine. But all it really does is lift buildings. So it's like he's basically threatening Empire City of like, you will do my bidding or I'm gonna lift this building. Well, you're gonna have to put it down eventually. You're gonna run out of fuel. You know, like, I don't get what the threat was there. At some point, it almost seems like a cat and mouse thing, you know, where like they have fallen into these roles and they really don't know how to get out of them. It's like they know they gotta go after Big Boss and Big Boss knows he has to kind of poke the bear, but they're all kind of tired of it by this point. Like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for 65 episodes, certainly. Like, if this were weekend syndication, like, if you had spread these 65 over 4 years, then they would have cranked out more toys, certainly. But I wouldn't have watched this 5 days a week.
Yeah, it's definitely a situation where it's almost like the characters are so well-rounded and even-tempered that you're just like watching it and you're like, okay, well, everybody gets along here. There doesn't seem to be any conflict. It's like, even the crooks get along. The crooks don't have infighting. Like, there's nobody trying to usurp Big Boss. You know, it's just crazy.
That was another thing, because you're bringing in all of these specialists from different arms of law enforcement. Cops are some of the most skeptical, untrusting people around. Like, you gotta earn their trust, but there's none of that. There's no, like, hazing period. There's no, like, having to prove your worth. Hell, like, BP doesn't ever really need to prove himself to the team. He goes out and gets nearly killed, and, like, okay, that gets him his own force, but I mean, Mainframe was picking up what he was putting down just from reading a file folder, you know? Like, that would have been interesting. I don't know if that could have developed, because there's an age difference there, and then you got the whole interracial aspect, but she was really there's a scene where it's like, okay, Mainframe, I got you. I got you. But like, other than that, though, there isn't that like infighting that you feel there should be. I feel like, especially so like Hardtop's like the rookie. There's never the point of like him having to prove himself to like a long arm. You know, it's like he and Mainframe wanted to be on the team. They didn't make the team, but then they saved the team, so they get to join the team. So it's like, you did one good day of work, and now we're gonna put you on this elite fighting force. Which, you can't get too complicated, I get it, but I feel the show is either really dumb or overly complicated.
Yeah, because when you talk about G.I. Joe, right, like we always had Cobra Commander and Destro butting heads. There was always a new leader coming into Cobra, for example. But even among the Joes, there were some that were more petty than others. Or there was, Beachhead is a hard case because he's got to train him, or Sergeant Slaughter, or whatever. Like, you had so many different dynamics, and there's no dynamics here, like on this show at all.
They all basically have the same personality. It grates on you, but also, like you were saying, with G.I. Joe, there's always a new, like, leader coming in, and that's to sell more toys. So, in this situation, I almost feel like they didn't set themselves up for season 2. Because I've told people before, my biggest gripe with this franchise is they never catch Big Boss in the show. They catch Big Boss in the DC comic, only because it got canceled. In the final issue of the C.O.P.S comic book, they finally get Big Boss on parking tickets. It's to allude to the Al Capone thing of how he got brought in for like tax evasion or whatever. So like after 65 episodes and like 13 issues of the comic, they finally get him on unpaid parking tickets. But then it's like they don't usher in Little Boss. They don't set up Berserko to take his place. There's no, because even in this show, there's Hyena. Hyena makes a power grab, and he's defeated by Big Boss, and he has his own goons, because Louis the Plumber, which is a play on Louis De Palma, is one of his henchmen. But later in the show, you see Hyena and Louis now doing Big Boss's bidding. So not only was he like defeated, but then he had to come work for the competition. But then it's like you have Rita, then you bring in Zed, then you bring in Rita's father, then you bring in all of their boss. There always needs to be a bigger Jaws for a bigger boat. And I don't see this escalating, like you said, because there's no dynamics. It's a flat series with no stakes outside of the pilot, and there are no highs and lows. It's a very Lexapro existence. You're riding straight through the middle.
Yeah, and some of the stuff, again, like as we close out here, I'll just say it's stuff that an adult is going to appreciate in a story, but a kid is going to be like, huh? Like, I'm going to read this one. This is The Case of the Sinister Spa. This is the one I was alluding to earlier. It says, a brand new Skyline Spa has just opened up, so a health club, right? It's operated by Misdemeanor, who uses mesmerizing fumes to put Mayor Davis under a trance, force him to hand over all authority to Berserko, who temporarily becomes deputy mayor of Empire City, and he then forces the cops to do community service as garbage collectors, while Mainframe and Mirage get captured at the spa, we should say. They don't say that here. And forced to do laundry for the crooks. And the two lady cops escape to help their teammates clean up the streets of Crooks and rescue Mayor Davis from the fuming trance. It's like, oh, they're being demoralized. They're cops, and now they're garbage men. And there's this spa going on. Oh, you know how there's this health craze? All these writers are probably like, oh, people go to the spa. That's ridiculous. You know, it's like the big thing of the 80s. There's so much there where it's just like a kid's going to be like, I don't care about any of this. I don't care about the politics. I don't care about the political structure of Empire City.
It's like how we laughed about Phantom Menace. It's like, oh, it's trade agreements. This is boring. It's the same thing here where there's no stakes here. They've just fallen into this pattern. It's like when kids in the 50s played cowboys and Indians. There's no real like trigger there. It's just, well, I'm a cowboy and I'm supposed to come after you, and you're an Indian, you're supposed to come after me. You know, it's like they fell into this cycle.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned they didn't set themselves up for a season 2. So let's see what we might do to fix the show as the show doctors. obviously my number one complaint was, the lack of youthful energy, the lack of excitement for kids. And that's what we're trying to say. How do you infuse it with something that could make it a little bit more interesting? Because I always feel like kids are looking forward, just like, you're in elementary school, you're looking at high school kids on Saved by the Bell, and that's aspirational. So you want to maybe set this in a high school situation, pull a 21 Jump Street for season 2 of Cops, and recruit a team of younger cops with attitude who just graduated from police academies around the country and have new cool skills that allow them to be specialists in undercover high school missions. And they'll be called the Punks, or Police Undercover Near Kids Schools. You'd have, a skateboarder with a rocket board, a female martial artist model, a video game champion who knows how to program games that could trick bad guys into confessing to their crimes. How about an international recruit from Brazil who's a soccer expert? He kicks soccer bombs. I don't know. And then the team would still be led by Bulletproof, and he would occasionally bring in other cops as mentors for specific assignments and teach the kids lessons and whatever, and to help them improve. Then, of course, Big Boy and the Crooks, they got to be recruiting gang members to be their next generation of criminals, and they'll be called the Jerks, or juvenile evil robbers creating, with a K, schemes, who are selling counterfeit concert tickets, robbing rich kids, holding illegal street races, and for the very special episode that would be nominated for an Emmy, selling drugs. This is my revamp, Punks and Jerks.
I love that. I love that so much, I probably don't even need to, come into this operation. But I'm gonna, because I paid a lot for show medical school. But I do love that. When it comes to this property, I'm thinking more along the toys than the actual show, because the show will follow suit. But what I would do in this period of time, because I mentioned the Power Ranger stuff before, I like the promotion aspect where it's like there's always a bigger fish. So I would bring in Bigger Boss, or Mega Boss, who's actually Big Boss's dad. He's moved back to Empire City. He had left it in the care of Big Boss, and he can't believe he hasn't closed the deal by now. So he's step aside. So he has his own hench people and all that stuff. I haven't named them because whatever. But we're gonna rebrand this. You know how toy lines, there are all these one series toy lines that we grew up thinking, oh, that just had one wave. And then in the early 2000s, we find out there were a second and third wave that only came out in South America. This would be one of those situations. So it's this second season is now called Cops 2000, because this is that period of time where we're really looking forward to the year 2000. And G.I. Joe already had Battle Force 2000. So it's we're really leaning on the technology aspect. But I wouldn't change the show too much. I would probably make the team even bigger. I do like your Punks idea, because we do need that insert character for kids, which there are times where it seems like they wanted Long Arm's kid to be that, but he needs to age up a little bit, because Long Arm's family is actually generational police in Empire City. They're Blue Bloods, because Long Arm's dad is a special advisor to the team because he was a cop, and Long Arm's a cop, and then little Brian's probably going to be a cop. So it's I would trace that. But if we're doing 2000, we don't know where they are now. We could say they're actually in 1990. So we could do a time jump if you want. Give BP Vest the Reed Richards streaks on the side just to show he's aged, show the passage of time. But really, it's just to sell more toys. And the toy aspect, which ties into the show, by now, I would hope they have perfected the Captain Power technology, because it wasn't great. For you people who don't know what I'm talking about, the syndicated Captain Power series interacted through infrared with the toys. So there were certain scenes during the show that would activate the plane and it would explode, or the figure would eject out of the cockpit. So it was kind of abandoned because I don't think it worked well. Bravestar also had a series that did that. But I'm going to say in this timeline, we stuck with the technology. We perfected perfected it. So then, graduating from the cap gun toys, we would now have the infrared toys because lasers are the future.
I think that's awesome. Yeah, definitely adding an interactive feature makes so much sense for the show. Because later on, they would also do like Bots Master, that show where you put on like 3D glasses for certain segments. This is definitely getting into that era where you want a gimmick that gets kids to tune in at least for that moment. So I think that's a great idea. And again, yeah, it extends the life of the toys, which is ultimately the main goal of C.O.P.S even existing. So excellent stuff. I think we have a winner here, Will. Let's bring it back. Speaking of which, in talking to Bart Sears, he said, we brought up Biker Mice from Mars too, there's this company right now, right, that is bringing back these kind of obscure properties, and apparently C.O.P.S is coming back. The action figures are probably going to be at a display in Walmart, and you'll be able to get your Bulletproof, I think is what Bart Sears said the first one was, that they had him to helping design the packaging for and things like that. So if this got you excited, now's the time to get your C.O.P.S hype ready to go, because who knows what else they're going to be releasing, so that's going to be fun as the time comes. Maybe they'll just give you a Big Boss and a Bulletproof to start, so we got to buy those up and then they'll keep producing them. But Will, next time around, we decided to stick with the world of animated adventures, but we're crossing over into the 90s and adding a dash of espionage as we talk about James Bond Jr. Ooh, there's some stirrings in the world of 007 these days, so it felt like the perfect time to talk about this strange world. Is it connected to James Bond? Is it not? We'll get into that. We'll give you our thoughts. But get ready for some adventure with 007.5. Find it where you can. And in the meantime, stay connected with us on social media at Remember Show Pod. We're so excited to hear your memories, especially about C.O.P.S in this case, but any of the shows we've talked about. If you have collectibles, share it with us. You can also stay connected with us on our personal accounts. I'm at Hoju Coolander across the socials. Will, where are you at?
I am William B. West everywhere.
Get the conversation going. And until next time, we're changing the channel.
This has been a presentation of Geekster Media.